7800s everywhere. What do you want? I want Atari. I do. What do you want? I want Atari. Ow. You want Atari 7800. Ow. Atari's the name of the game, dudes.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Player One Start. In today's video we're going to take another look at the Atari 7800. Previously on the channel we've taken a deep dive look at this console in the Ultimate Atari 7800 review. I also had it square off against the Sega Master System and Nintendo Entertainment System to see which console of the 8-bit war was better. Outside of that though, I haven't really given much attention to the Atari 7800, and that is mostly due to the fact that there just aren't that many games that were released for this system. Outside of another video I did where I took a look at light gun games for the Atari 7800, which is ironic because there was no light gun release specifically for this system, I really haven't had much of a reason to come back here. That is, until now. In the retro gaming community, I was surprised to see how many people are very passionate about this system. As from my perspective, when I grew up, I had never heard of the Atari 7800 until I started collecting games in the early 2000s. And after years of collecting and finally getting a system of my own with a composite mod, I've had a lot of fun getting to know this system and playing some of these games. And the question I get most often with this system is, what games do I recommend? So I thought I'd take the time to make a 10 games that I feel are essential if you own an Atari 7800. I've actually already done this for a few consoles already, including the Atari 2600, the 5200, as well as other consoles like the Nintendo Entertainment System and Sega Master System. But if you want to see my criteria for what games make this list, I have those posted on the screen, but I describe these in more detail in my 10 essential games for Atari 2600 video. I also posed the question, what games do you feel are essential for the Atari 7800, on my various social media accounts, so if you'd like to be involved in that discussion in a future video, you can find and follow me on my various links on my website, playeronestart.net. With that said, let's go ahead and get started with 10 games I feel are essential for those that own an Atari 7800. Joust was developed by Williams Electronics and Atari and initially released in the arcades in 1982. In the game, you control a yellow knight that rides an ostrich, which I admit is a very unique concept, but it actually becomes very fun and addicting very quickly. Your goal is to joust and defeat other enemies on the screen, thereby turning them into an egg, which you can grab before they hatch for extra points. If the opposing character hits you first or has the high ground, then you lose. Run out of lives and it's game over. However, if you defeat all enemies on the screen, then you move on to the next more challenging wave. The platforms on the stage change with each level, eventually opening up a lava field at the bottom of the screen. This game is fun in single-player mode, but I also recommend the two-player mode, as you can play cooperatively to beat each wave. You can also pick up the Atari 2600 title for this console, as it is backwards compatible, but I prefer the 7800's version as it has more detail on the graphics. Overall, this game is really fun, and one that I think is a very good experience on your 7800, and I would definitely recommend it to those with this system. Next on my list is Galaga, which is a fixed shooter arcade video game that was developed and published by Namco originally, hitting arcades in 1981. Galaga is the sequel to Galaxian, which is itself kind of a modified version of Space Invaders to make it a bit more exciting. Your goal is just to defeat wave after wave of enemies on screen that fly in from the sides or the top, eventually lining up in a formation at the top of the screen, and then some of them dive down at you. This is one of those games that embodies the Atari spirit of easy to pick up but difficult to master. And overall, it just provides that arcade space shooter feel of the early 1980s that I think people will appreciate, especially if you're a fan of this system, and the game performs quite well with very little slowdown or sprite flickering. I don't think you can go wrong with this one. Keeping in line with the good arcade ports here is Ms. Pac Man. This is a game that I've spent a lot of time playing in arcades, for some reason even more than the original Pac Man. I really like how the game stays challenging by moving the stages around after you defeat each area, and the story of how Pac Man and Ms. Pac Man meet unfolds throughout some of the game as well. And in terms of the Atari 2600 version, this game is a much more welcome upgrade. As this game was released in the early 1980s and this console was designed around 1984, the Atari 7800 really makes easy work of this game. And it controls fairly well with the Atari 7800 joystick controller, but as I may have mentioned in other videos, I prefer playing games on the Atari 7800 with this custom Nintendo-style controller. which from what I understand was actually the default style of the controller overseas in PAL regions. Either way, this game performs well, it's a very good port, and I would recommend it for the 7800. This game was one of the first scrolling shooter games that were released in arcades by Namco in 1982. In this game, you take control of your starship as you attack Xevious forces before they destroy all of mankind. You have two different weapons, one for shooting enemies in the air and another one for dropping bombs on the ground. My strategy is, though, if you have the choice, always shoot both. Other than that, the game is pretty straightforward as you go through. However, I think the biggest barrier to entry with this game is just how challenging it can be. Every time you get blown up or shot down in this game, you do get set back a little bit so you can resume playing. The graphics of this game, though inferior to the arcade game, are very well detailed for the time, and it's something that really didn't detract from my gameplay. It may be with this game where you realize that the biggest fault with the 7800 is perhaps its lack of additional sound hardware, having to rely on the same sound hardware that was present in the Atari 2600. So this is one of those games where I'd find myself muting it and putting on some other music in the background. For some reason, I'm thinking that music would be on vinyl record, but that's most likely due to the age of this game. Still, as one of the few scrolling shooters on the platform, I think this is one that a majority of people may enjoy, and I would definitely recommend it for your 7800. Next, I'm gonna kinda cheat because I'm actually gonna show two games, but I would recommend one or the other as essential for your collection. The choice at this point is up to you between Donkey Kong or Donkey Kong Jr. For those of you that think it's strange to see a Nintendo IP on other consoles, this was more common back in the 80s than you may think. As all throughout the 80s, I think Donkey Kong appeared on almost every 8-bit computer and home console other than Sega's Master System, and I'm sure Atari took a lot of pleasure in being able to port this to their home console, as it also had a port on the Nintendo Entertainment System, which the 7800 would directly compete with. In terms of this port on the 7800, this one is pretty faithful enough, and I didn't really see any issues with it, leaving me to definitely recommend it for fans of arcade action platformers of the 1980s. The same is said for Donkey Kong Jr., except for my only caveat with this game is I really find the music a bit intolerable at the very beginning. Yeah, that's very hard to listen to, at least for me. But after that, the gameplay is pretty much what you would expect for Donkey Kong Jr., and the graphics aren't really too far off from the arcade version either. So again, in this respect, I'm only recommending one of these as essential, but if you're a fan, you definitely have to pick up both. Alright, we're already halfway through this list, and the only thing that I've mentioned so far are arcade ports. And that's mainly because that's most of what this system has. This game here, though, is called Dark Chambers, which some casual fans of this game may think is an exclusive to this platform, but it was released on Atari's 8-bit line, as well as the Amstrad, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum. However, on those platforms, it was most likely called Dandy, but in terms of home video game consoles, it is exclusive to this system. And this is a game I can't recommend enough for the Atari 7800. This game has you navigate your character through a maze-like dungeon seen from an overhead view. The dungeon has multiple levels connected together using stairwells. Some of the mazes will require you to collect a key to get past certain barriers so you can continue on, all while fighting against various enemies. The goal in each level is literally just to get to the end of the maze and continue on through the dungeon until you reach the end. You are armed with a bow and arrow, which can be shot in 8 different directions, and as monsters can fill rooms very quickly and approach you from multiple different directions at once, firing in all 8 directions is a welcome feature. You can pick up power-ups such as potions, which can destroy all monsters on the screen when activated, and a special heart of gold can also be collected to revive dead party members. Overall, I do have a fun time with this game every time I pop it in, and I would definitely recommend this for those that have a 7800, as there's really nothing like it on the platform. The next game on my list is Pole Position 2, which was released as a sequel to Atari's own Pole Position. I recommend this game because during the 1980s, these raster effect arcade racing games were all over the place, and Pole Position was a very competent title out of those offered in the arcades and on home consoles. They truly don't make games like this anymore because at this point in time, racing games were only limited by the capabilities of the console, and ever since consoles have been capable of full-screen, real-time 3D rendering, they haven't really needed to make a racing game like this. I have spent many hours playing Pole Position and this game on the 7800, and I feel like it is essential for those that want a racing game experience that has the simplicity of being able to pick it up from the arcade, while also challenging you to master each course. This next game actually was not even on my radar until I posed the question to the community, which games do you feel are essential for the Atari 7800? And almost overwhelmingly I kept hearing the title Desert Falcon, which I actually didn't even know existed until I did this video. And I'm very glad people steered me towards this title because this is another game that is right up my alley. It is a scrolling shooter game, but it is from an isometric perspective, which yes, definitely gives me Zaxxon vibes. But overall, being a scrolling shooter game, I was definitely hooked from the very beginning. I must have spent just a good hour and a half straight while capturing gameplay footage, just to see how far I can get into this game, and even though I didn't get very far, I kept going back for more. So here you go, I would definitely recommend this as essential as the community has recommended. Food Fight is another game that was recommended from the community that I include on a 10 essential games list, as it kept showing up from people recommending it. And if it weren't for those recommendations, this game actually would have been cut from my list, but it just barely wouldn't have made it for me, as there are other games on this system I definitely enjoy, almost just as good as this one, but maybe not quite as much. Still, this game is kind of a unique concept, as you have to run around collecting food items to throw at all of the enemies that are trying to stop you from reaching your melting ice cream cone before it completely melts. This game is incredibly fun and addicting once you get into it, and even though it was released in arcades, the 7800 port does make easy work of this game, again because of its advanced features over the Atari 2600. Alright, and before I reveal my final pick for an essential Atari 2600 game, I thought I would show you a game that I would add on this list if it wasn't so expensive. Ninja Golf was a lucky thrift store find for me, because when I got the game, it actually didn't have a cartridge label on it, and the store that was selling it misidentified it as Donkey Kong. When I popped it in and I saw Ninja Golf on the screen, I was intrigued from the very title of the game. In this game, you're literally a ninja who plays golf, and every time after you hit your ball on your way to its destination, you have to fight ninjas the entire time. For those of you that don't like golf games, this is the best it's going to get for you. I can't tell you how many hours I have spent showing other people this game, playing it, and just having fun, just seeing how far we can get before we die, all the time just laughing at who came up with a game with ninjas and golf. What makes it even more strange is when you go to the green to putt, you just have to face off against a dragon in kind of a third-person perspective here, throwing ninja stars while avoiding the fireballs, and that's it. You don't even get to putt, you just move on to the next hole once you defeat the dragon. And as far as I can tell, that's where the process just starts all over. This game is exclusive to the Atari 7800. It was released late into the life cycle, and that's why it's a bit more rare, and hence is why it's over 3 digits just to collect this game. So while I would love to include this on the 10 Essential Games list, I'm giving it an honorable mention just because of the price. I can't recommend it as essential for everybody. Last on my list of essential games would have to be Choplifter. The quality of my capture footage here is a little bit lower because this is one of the last games I was able to capture from my DVD recorder before it died. So the footage you're seeing here is actually standard definition television signal being upscaled to 1080. In this game, though, you play as a helicopter pilot that is trying to rescue soldiers from the battlefield and bring them back to your base. All the while, you have to destroy enemy tanks and aircraft to get them back to the base safely, and then do it all again in the next level. Your strategy in this game involves taking out enemy aircraft and tanks while trying to fill your helicopter to capacity, as you can only hold 16 soldiers at a time, and soldiers can be injured on the way to your aircraft. Oh yeah, and in this version of the game, as well as the Apple II version, you can actually kill the passengers in your helicopter by not landing correctly. If your helicopter is even slightly tilted when you hit the ground, your rescuees die. It's a very simplistic game, but one that is again challenging with each playthrough, and easy to pick up if you just want to have a casual playthrough. Definitely one I consider essential on your Atari 7800. So there you have it. That is 10-ish games that I would recommend for the Atari 7800 as essential if you have this console. But before you go rushing to the comments to adamantly defend or to state how much you can't believe I forgot your favorite game on this list, I do have one more honorable mention, as it was one that was mentioned across several websites and in several replies to the polls I posted on social media. I'm just going to mention it here because it is personally not a favorite of mine, so I wouldn't call it essential, but apparently everyone else would. So yes, this is Ball Blazer, and this is a title that is almost synonymous with the Atari 7800. I can imagine back in the day that I would have had a lot of fun playing this game against one of my older brothers. The game itself is like a 3D version of tennis, or football, or hockey, or some other similar sport. And the playfield graphics they have on here are done very well. My problem with this title is that it is a sports title and therefore best played with a second human player. Which means for me personally, I can't recommend this as essential if it doesn't have a good single-player experience as well. I know many of you are bound to disagree with that opinion, so I'm going to add this as an honorable mention so that if you want to choose this and swap it out for any of the other 10 games on this list, you can feel free to. Well, there you have it. That is my list of 10 games that I feel are essential if you own an Atari 7800. What did you guys think of my list? Leave a comment down below about games that you liked featured in this video, or games that you would have added instead. Also, let me know down in the comments below which console you would like me to cover next for 10 essential games that I would recommend for that system, and for consoles I've already done, they should be popping up here in just a moment. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A special thanks to those Patreons you see on screen. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.